I just missed the connection I had with him, and I loved him, and I felt, I guess, very guilty. And seeing my grandmother and people hurt. I just felt like that was not something. I mean, I knew that Erik had talked to people about it, but I wasn't going to say what happened to me. And
why not?
I just didn't want to say that my dad did those things. I didn't want to say the things he did to me. And
why? Why didn't you want to say what your dad had done to you?
Because I was ashamed. And if I was asked to here, and I never wanted to have to do what I did here. And it's been very depressing to have to do that. And I've felt drained since I've done it, and I felt like I betrayed my dad to some extent. And I had a good relationship with my grandmother, and I didn't want her to hear those things from me.
Your grandmother, you mean your father's mother?
Right.
Why is it a betrayal of your father?
It just feels that way. I don't know why.
Do you want people to think well of your father?
I would have liked that.
Why, after all he did to you, do you want people to think well of your father? Do you feel like you've betrayed him now by the things you've told about him here in court?
I have.
How do
I
you
have
feel?
betrayed him.
How do you feel about having betrayed him?
Just depressed. And wishing that I don't know, sorry.
So in the letter, you didn't tell her about your father, is that right?
No.
Did you tell her about the fear?
Yes.
Mama told me when I was young, come sit beside me, my only son. Listen closely to what I say, and if you do this, it'll help you some sunny take your time. Don't live too fast. Troubles will come, they will pass. Go find a woman, yeah, you'll find love. Don't forget, son, there's someone up above. And be simple.
People assume that if you have money, you have no problems. And you're certainly not going to do anything like kill your parents because you got it made. And it turns out that rich people have dysfunctional families just as much as poor people. One kid killing the parents is a bad seed. Two kids killing the parents is a bad family.
But won't you do this for me, son, if you can? Forget your lust for rich man's gold. All that you need is in your soul. You can do this, so baby, if you try. All that I want for you, my son, is to be satisfied.
Before we begin, I wanted to lay out a few things I think are critical to keep in mind while watching Lyle's testimony. First, let's explore his general demeanor while on the stand. The main point of note here is that Lyle sounds like a small boy when he speaks. He's very quiet, he's highly emotional, and he cried way more than Erik because he's finally in a position to allow himself to feel what he needs to feel to be human. He is no longer an emotionless Jose Menendez clone. He is being himself truly and speaking in earnest without a filter for the first time ever, but he still has to be coached to even do that properly. As you begin to watch his testimony, you'll notice that he has a peculiar habit. He nods excessively and has to be made to verbalize his answers by his counsel, by the prosecution, and by the judge himself. Whenever he silently nods or shakes his head, these three people have to force him to say either yes or no for the record. And these are not normal nods. They are very childlike. They are very nervous and timid. They are something you would expect from someone half his age. Even Erik didn't behave this way on the stand, as lost and as adorable as he was. He still knew to speak up anytime he was asked a question.
Did you and your brother kill your mother and father? Did you kill them for money? Is that no?
No.
Did you kill them because you wanted to pay them back for the way they had treated you?
No.
Was this your father's mother and father? Is that yes?
Yes.
Were these good times for you or bad times?
Sometimes it was good.
And sometimes it was bad?
I would be crying. This would be very rough, like I said. And
4 or 5 hours?
45, 40 hours a week.
40 to 45 hours a week? And this is during, and you're 13 and you're going to school also? Yes?
Yes.
Did your dad find him?
I never really knew.
Because you never saw them afterward, or? Is that yes?
He would be focused on those areas, but I didn't see I've never seen these pictures.
Did you want to do this? You reloaded? Is that yes?
Yes.
Was that the last shot that was fired? Is that yes?
Yes. Yes. No, he dragged me to the car, and I don't believe that he said anything. And I knew what was obvious.
Your Honor, could you ask the witness to keep your voice up?
Yes, if you could speak up a little bit.
Lyle's demeanor and his inclination to nod instead of speaking clearly is a habit he acquired in that terrifying household where he knew nothing he said would really matter anyway, and where he was teased for not saying the correct thing at the correct time, and often teased and punished for stammering, and where he was simply too petrified to open his mouth and speak for fear of repercussion.
What other flaws did he set as goals to be corrected?
Speech.
What was wrong with your speech?
And I also sometimes stuttered because I just couldn't respond because I'd be so tense.
How would he handle that?
To make fun of it, he'd just stutter back. And sometimes he would send me in a room and say, come back when I can talk. Sometimes he would just wait. And I would just keep trying, keep trying to get the words out. And he knew what I wanted to say. He just let me go on.
And how old were you at these times when he was making fun of your stuttering?
Pretty much mostly in Muncie and sometimes in Pennington if I got really nervous. I didn't really have a stuttering problem like my brother did more. I just in some talks with my dad, I just was like crumbling. I just couldn't get the words out. Couldn't form the sentences.
What did you do to try and avoid stuttering? Or to try and avoid him humiliating you? Was there anything you could do about it?
No, I really didn't talk much around my dad, only if I was asked. And I couldn't avoid it if I was asked.
This played into why he never told anyone about his problems as well. He had been programmed and threatened to keep silent about the things that went on in that household. And he was so traumatized by the way his dad grilled him and belittled his answers every night at dinner for his entire life that it's clear he developed the inclination to remain as silent as possible as a method of self-preservation.
Were there serious discussions at the dinner table in your house?
Very serious.
And starting at about what age?
Since I can remember, but certainly in the Muncie house.
And in the Muncie house, you were 6, 7, 8?
He'd want to know about my whole day. We might be going out to a practice after we got home. It just depended, but whatever happened, it was going to be very intense. My dad was just that kind of a guy. It was very sharply intense.
At the dinner table, would he have talks with you?
Yes, he'd have talks. It was basically with just me. Occasionally talk to my brother, but very rarely. And during these conversations, occasionally, she would just make a noise and shake her head. She'd go, and my dad would grab me, and he'd yank me out of the table, and he'd just drag me down to the room, and he'd say I was lying. And I would be in the room, and then he would go, and he would punish me.
Did this happen every night at dinner?
Not like that.
Were you asked about your day every night at dinner?
Mm-hmm.
Is that yes?
Yes.
What if you didn't know the answer?
Sometimes, if it depended on what the question was, but if I could look it up, he'd make me go find the passages. I'd spend my time searching. If I found it, I came back. If enough time went by, he'd say, just forget about it, just come back. Sometimes I would get a lot of answers wrong, and he would just sort of start tensing up and shaking his head, and he'd sort of just explode. He'd just reach out and he'd grab you. And usually with me, he'd open the sliding glass window and he'd just throw me outside onto the porch. And just close the door.
How long would you stay outside?
A few hours.
What about the dinner table? You heard your brother describe what he was put through at the dinner table. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And did that sound right to you? Is that what you recall happening at the dinner table to your brother?
Yeah, it was much worse than he described, but it was bad.
Much worse for him?
Yes.
This speaks to his emotional maturity, even in 1993, when he was illegally 25 on the stand. What I find most remarkable is that this man is clearly so traumatized and so damaged himself, but he still found it in his heart to protect and care for his little brother at any cost. Lyle's emotional maturity at the time of the murders lied somewhere around 10 years old, according to expert witnesses who testified about the boy's mental health and psychological makeup. Eric's was around 8 years old, especially at the time of the crimes. Despite that fact, Lyle still took it upon himself to look after his little brother in the best way he knew how. Undeniably, the most wholesome part of their entire pitiful lives has always been the bond they developed with each other, in spite of their parents pitting them against one another early on, and in spite of the dad's relentless divide and conquer stratagems, which he practiced at home as well as in the world at large. Lyle showered with his dad his entire life, even up to the Beverly Hills house, which meant up until he was 21 years old, right before the killings.
Basically, he said that his father had been through abuse and error.
Yeah, human error. And we take baths with him and stuff.
And what would they do when they came in?
They would come in and I'm not sure what point they grabbed something to eat, then they would head upstairs for showers.
Would they take showers individually or together?
Together. Including 82, 83 visit, yes.
And after they all showered together, what would they do next?
I would see them come out, all three of them, each of them in their robes, and the three of them would go into the den area where they would sit, which was adjoining the master bedroom.
Did you shower with your dad in the Princeton Junction house?
I did.
Did you shower with your dad in the Pennington house?
Yes, sometimes.
Did you shower with your dad in the Beverly Hills house?
Sometimes.
When you showered with your dad in the Princeton Junction house, what was the joke that he would play?
I would be in there, and sometimes my brother would be in there too, the three of us. And he would turn the water all the way to cold sometimes, and then he would just step out and hold us in. And then the water would go from being warm to just freezing water. And we would be screaming and trying to get out. And he would do this, and he would be laughing.
Your brother testified there were times when you and your brother and your father would shower together and your father would do something with the water?
Yes.
Was that an experience that you recall?
Yes. When I was washing my hair and the shampoo was getting on my face, he would suddenly turn the water either all the way cold or all the way hot.
You said he would turn the water all the way hot or all the way cold.
Yes.
Did you ever get burned?
Yes. Because it was sort of a thing that he used to do. And then he would have Lyle and I see who was the strongest person by, he wouldn't turn the water hot, he would turn it all the way cold and see who could last for 30 seconds in the water, who could last for 45 seconds, and so on.
Were there other places in the house where sexual activity between yourself and your father would occur?
Only one other place.
And where was that?
In the shower.
Now, when you and your brother and your father showered together, was there any sex on those occasions?
No.
Were there other occasions when just you and your father showered together?
Yes.
And was there sex on those occasions?
Not always, but sometimes.
Lyle played with stuffed animals until he was the age 17, and this is shocking corroborating evidence for his emotional maturity at the time of the killings, which was around 10 years old.
You've referred before to your stuffed animals. I have some pictures up there.
That's my brother and I on Easter with some more stuffed animals that I got. These are more, these are new, and this Cookie Monster is from...
Can't hear you.
These are new, and these Cookie Monster is from Muncie.
So you...
Looks like me in the background.
So you brought Cookie Monster in to have this picture taken, the new animals?
Yes.
What's your earliest memory of playing with stuffed animals?
I started getting the collecting the stuffed animals around when I started in Muncie. I can't remember before that. That's when I got Cookie Monster, and I believe that's when I got the Sesame Street group. I'm not positive.
How long did you continue collecting the animals and playing with them?
Till about 17, I guess. Oh no, they all had personalities and names, and I acted out things with the stuffed animals, and they would have the same personality throughout, and they were.
What kind of personalities? You've mentioned Cookie Monster. What kind of personality
There
did he have?
would be weak ones that were like these two rabbits were weak, and there were some others that were. They were just more helpless. And then there were, once Cookie Monster was the worst, and then there were a group of more meaner, violent stuffed animals. And they slept with me on the bed. It was a big deal. It was important. I spent any spare time I had, but I would stay up late after my parents put me to bed and play with them in the dark. It was very important, very special.
And did the rest of your family members know how important the animals were to you?
Yes.
Sometimes when other family members were unhappy with you, would they take it out on the animals?
Yes. Yes. The Cookie Monster, well, my mother threw a tantrum and basically broke him because the eyes were attached and the one broke off in a tantrum in my room. And sometimes I would find some in the shower soaked, which is usually my dad. Like the time my mother just threw them out the window when I met my bed. And there were a lot of instances where I was vulnerable there.
Did you get thrown out of class one day because you brought your animals to class and you were raising the animal's hand rather than yours?
Yes.
How old were you?
It was 10th grade, so 16. This was a card that went with some roses that I sent her. I love you. I will always love you, Lyle.
What's it say inside?
It says, P.S. This gift is sent to you from Pookie, Webster, Cookie, Froggy 1 and 2, Theodore, Pinky, Dino, all the Teddies, Lammy, Medium and Little Cookie, Woodstock, Odie, Garfield, King Kong, Snoopy, all the little dogs, including Snoopy the Great Magician. Panda, Rabby, all the other rabbits, Zuki, the Man, Oscar, Old and New, Scooby-Doo, Bugs Bunny, Koala, Sammy the Snake, all the lambs, Paddington Bear, Pinata, Philly Fanatic, Darth Vader, Robot, the other Pinatas, both lions, Shogun Warrior, my fish, Indiana, which is the name of my turtle, Chipper, which was the ferret, Velvet, which was the dog, Eagle, and not to mention me.
How old were you when you sent that card?
16 years old.
These stuffed animals.
Yes, but that goes to a much larger issue, I think, than just the molestation. Yeah, I think his discussion of the stuffed animals was really quite amazing. Many survivors have stuffed animals. I believe Dr. Briere, I read his testimony about that, and he said that. And that is true. I think many survivors do. Although I've never actually seen that described in the literature. It's something that people who work with survivors tend to know. But what was phenomenal about Lyle's use of the stuffed animals is that he really, first of all, he had large numbers of them, and he gave them personalities, and he acted out scenarios with those stuffed animals, kind of issues in his life. And he had personalities in the animals, or gave personalities, that sort of represented issues in his life. In a way that I've never heard from another victim, he, in a way, was doing play therapy. When we see traumatized kids, we often ask them to act out with animals, with puppets sometimes with a dollhouse, sometimes in sand play, their bad experiences. The difference between Lyle's acting out his issues with his stuffed animals and play therapy is that there was no therapist there to help guide the process. So his description of how important the animals were and what he did with the animals, he took them when he buried the rabbit, for example, some of them were there, and his collecting other animals that were kind of orphaned by his brother. This is sort of an over-involvement, or it's an excessive use of animals for to meet a therapeutic need. For example, one point that his mom had thrown a stuffed animal out and the dogs had got it and ripped it up, and he told me that he had been able to save the hat. They're still important to him in a way. That description was wholly believable to me, and I don't think a non-victim would have known that therapeutic use. And I talked to Stacey Feldman, his first girlfriend, on my trip to New Jersey, and she described, oh yeah, the animals, and so there's confirmation just about how important these were in his life. So that's one of a number of factors, I think, that I found to be important in sort of assessing his overall credibility.
problem with bedwetting?
Yes.
Until how old?
14. Just made fun of me.
What would he say?
Say you're a sissy like your brother. And he'd just be totally disgusted. Didn't want to talk to me. Sometimes we'd skip practices if my mom had said that I wet my bed, and he didn't want anything to do with me. Sometimes it would just upset him so much, he would explode, and I would get beaten for it.
What about when you were older, when you were 12 or 13? And
I would get beaten for it.
what about when you were older, when you were 12 or 13 and it was still happening?
My mother was mostly the one that would explode about the bedwetting thing, or punish me about the bedwetting. Sometimes she would rub my face in the sheets. She'd refuse to change the sheets, and I'd sleep on the floor. She'd abuse my stuffed animals. I remember one time she just threw them all out the window, and I came home from school and they were all on the grassy area in front of the house, wet from the mildew, and one of the dogs had eaten up one of them. And and sometimes I would just be banished from the house, like I was in Muncie. I would just stay outside.
Were you ever taken to a doctor?
No. I was very embarrassed, and I believed that it was a big flaw. And I was trying desperately to not do it. And I just had problems, and there's like nothing I could do. And then
Simply put, Lyle was a very disturbed, friendless, and quiet child.
You talked about discipline problems. Was Lyle ever a discipline problem in your class?
Never, never.
Did he ever speak?
Never offered a word, had no sense of humor, was very unusual, a very unusual child.
Unusual in what way?
Unusual that he was unlike all the others.
In what way?
Quiet, never ever offered a word in class. He had a look which worried me, which was he could disassociate himself from what was happening in the class. You could just see Lyle taking notes, and then all of a sudden, he was gone. And that worried me too. There was a certain disassociation that occurred.
Did Lyle have a lot of friends in school?
No.
How would you describe him? A member of a group, a loner? How would you describe him?
A loner. Sad, pathetic, alone, morose, non-communicative.
Lyle would usually sit quietly on there's a bench in my office, and he would sit there, waiting for his mother.
Was he respectful toward you?
Yes, very.
Was he quiet?
He was very quiet. He'd just sit on the bed and wait for his mother.
Did he seem to have a lot of friends in the school?
No. I never really saw Lyle at a party at which I had picked up my daughter.
Did you get to be friends with the other kids on the team?
no, not really.
Why not?
I just didn't spend any time with him, and my dad didn't want that.
Why not?
It's just part of his philosophy. If I started becoming friendly with these other players, I wouldn't be competitive. At one point, I had a conversation with Jerry and his dad, and they were kind of, Jerry's dad usually, pretty much always came to the games too, and he would take Jerry aside after the coach finished talking to everybody, and he would sort of laugh and talk with Jerry, and sometimes I wander over in that direction, and my dad would usually call me back, say, I want to talk to you. And in the basement, my dad brought it up. He said, you know, you were over talking to Jerry and his dad. Well, what did I tell you about having friends? I said, he just wanted to talk to me about practicing after Dad. I think it's a good idea. He said, no. What did I tell you about having friends? And then he'd say, let's go over it. And that's when we put our heads together. And that's when I would repeat to him. He would say, tell me what I told you about friends. And I would say, I have to constantly struggle because there are forces that tear me down, and sometimes they'd be disguised in the form of a smile or the hand of a friend.
Was that a quote from something?
It was a quote from the book.
And did he then find a girlfriend?
He found a girlfriend.
And is that Stacy Feldman there in the
Yes.
picture?
Yes.
And was there something unusual about the relationship between Lyle and Stacy?
Yes.
What was that?
The other kids thought it uncool to hold hands or be so unguarded in the hallways to show affection towards each other. But they were always holding each other. They were always together.
And was there something unusual about the amount of time that they spent together?
It was obsessive. It was really, that's all they had. They had each other.
Menendez?
Yes.
If it's 1973 and Lyle was born in 68, he would have been about 5 years old.
Yes.
Did you observe a situation in which Jose Menendez had a confrontation with his son, Lyle Menendez?
Yes. We were having a family gathering, and Lyle was very restless and hyperactive. He couldn't sit still, so he was kind of running. And Jose shouted at him, "Stop!" And apparently he didn't hear. He didn't stop.
Now, normally when Jose yelled stop, would he stop?
By all means, yes, he would. Jose stood up, grabbed him, and just looked at him, and right in the eyes, and said something to him that I couldn't hear. And Lyle became incontinent at the time. He wetted himself on the floor.
And how did he look when this happened?
He looked pale and trembling. He looked very scared.
And what happened after that?
Well, after he became incontinent, his father took him to Lyle's room, and I followed him. I entered the room, and I kind of yelled at him. When I say him, at Jose's, because Jose was doing things that, according to myself, were way out of it. And Jose, in that instance, hit Lyle with his closed fist.
Where did he hit him?
On his chest or belly.
Did he seem to hit him hard?
Yes, he did.
And Lyle would have been about 5 years old at this time?
Yes.
And did Lyle cry out in any way?
I don't remember seeing him crying. He just, I don't know how, but he took it. And apparently he lost his hair or something. I cannot repeat the same things that I did say. I gave him a good piece of my mind, and I told him that was not the way to bring up a child. To which he responded that if I didn't like that, I could leave his house, that he could raise his children as he saw fit.
Did you leave his house?
Yes, I did.
What happened?
This is at the Lawrenceville Deli. At the Lawrenceville Deli, the guy behind the counter was very friendly. They'd had the place forever, and he knew me every time I came in my soccer clothes. Basically, he sneaked me in a bag, some pastries and cookies and stuff.
Did your dad find him?
He found them on me outside the store.
Were you eating them?
I was eating them. Yes. He just grabbed them out of my hand, and he just grabbed me by the neck. He just punched me in the stomach.
Did he say anything?
No, he dragged me to the car, and I don't believe that he said anything.
Do you have another scar on your face below your lower lip?
Yes.
Do you have another scar on your face below your lower lip?
Yes.
How old were you when you got that?
I was about 17, I think.
And how did that happen?
I was in the tennis. I was at a club with a coach of mine. Well, we wouldn't play more than 5 minutes, and my dad pulled up in the limo, came around the side of the bushes, came to a stop. We were like, "Man, he must have called from the car." We thought he was at his office in New York, and he couldn't get there. So he pulled up, and he got out, and he was watching. I had sprained my ankle, and so I had an ankle problem still, and I was playing with it. And so I just wasn't running as fast, and my dad was ridiculing me and pushing me and saying, you know, what a baby. Look, Brad, he can't run fast. Look at him. Look at him, oh, poor baby. I was so embarrassed, and I just couldn't take it anymore, and I lost control, and I told my dad, why don't you just shut up?
Had you ever said anything like that to your dad before?
No, never. I looked at him, my dad. You couldn't believe the transformation of my dad. He just turned red, and he didn't know what to do with himself. He grabbed the ball, and he threw it at me. I wanted the ball to hit me.
Why?
Because I had screwed up, and I was hoping. My dad he lost control there, and I wanted to just dissipate it. Maybe, you know, if he was going to throw a ball at me, I was going to make sure I got hit by the ball. So I got hit by the ball. He told me to come over, and I kind of walked up to him. He led me over to the back of the car.
How did he lead you over to the back of the car?
He just grabbed me by the arm and led me. He put me in the back of the car. As soon as I got in the back of the car, he just punched me straight in the face. And I went back against the window, and he grabbed my neck. He said, don't ever embarrass me like that again, or I'll kill you. I had blood all over my shirt.
I can't hear you. Move up. I asked you what you did.
I was in shock. I didn't do anything. I nodded my head, and he tightened his grip on my neck, and he says, is that perfectly clear? And I said, yes.
Did you ever talk back to him again?
No, I never talked back to him again. And
what happened to your lip?
It split open completely, and we went back home. Long drive home, and my mother basically attended me, and we just put gauze in the whole thing. I was really in shock, and I just sat there. I didn't know what the limo driver was going to do. I didn't want him to see me. I was embarrassed. I didn't know what Brad was going to say later. I just sat in the car. He came back. He told the driver, let's go.
Were you crying?
I was sobbing, and blood everywhere, and just staying near the door.
He was trained by both parents to show zero emotion, even when the dad gut punched him like he was a grown man at 5 years old. He was criticized by both parents for showing weakness, fear, or pain since he was little. Where do you think all those repressed emotions go if they're not properly vented at the moment they are provoked? They don't magically dissipate. Instead, they quietly recede, only to accumulate over time, eventually culminating in either a major implosion or explosion. And we all saw which direction Lyle's mind took in that regard in 1989. A prime example of how evident it always was that these boys were being severely abused came from the testimony of Lyle's high school Spanish teacher, meaning when Lyle was about 16 years old. He came to his teacher's office on more than one occasion and would sit and not say a word for over 45 minutes. He would then get up and leave without any explanation and still not a word spoken, despite the teacher's attempts to elicit a response from him.
Did you have a situation in which Lyle engaged in what you thought was unusual behavior with regard to coming to visit you?
Yes, there were 2 instances, but he sat there, and so I tried to elicit something from him, and to be honest with you, there was no exchange. There were no words exchanged for 30-40 minutes, and I wondered what it was, what this was all about. No other student had ever done this. This happened twice.
And was the second visit the same? He just came and sat there?
Exactly the same. Well, you try to elicit, you say, hello, how are you? You need help with your homework, etc. You elicit, you try to. But when nothing is forthcoming, you realize that, there's just so far you can go. And I didn't want to make him feel unwelcomed also. I didn't want to say, well, if you have nothing to say, leave. So I kept hoping that he would say something. I mentioned it to her the next time we met socially.
And did you express some concern about what was going on?
Most definitely.
And after you told Mrs. Menendez about Lyle's behavior, did Lyle ever come back to your office?
Never.
This was a painfully obvious cry for help that went completely ignored, and it breaks my heart. He just could not bring himself to verbalize what was wrong, or who was hurting him, or who was hurting his brother, or in what ways they were being hurt. He was just trapped and bound to silence by terror. As both brothers got older and matured as much as their psychological makeups would allow them to, they both became a little more confident and began to have some friends, and then subsequently began to realize just how abnormal their lives were and how abnormal their relationships were with their parents, especially the continuous rape and incest. But there was still really nothing they could do about it. Eventually, Lyle physically got away because he went to college, and he felt very guilty that he had to abandon his brother during that time, especially in 1986 when the mother became severely mentally ill. But even though Lyle was physically out of his parents' presence, he was still psychologically very much under their control. The mother called his Aunt Terry, who lived nearby in Princeton, New Jersey, where Lyle attended university, and she would gather every tiny, minute detail of Lyle's day-to-day that took place on the East Coast. His father also called him obsessively as well, and grilled him like he used to do at dinner, but now the interrogations were far more intense because he lived away from home. Lyle was so programmed by his father that he still called his dad anytime he had any small issue at the college. His parents were also still filling out all of his paperwork and making all of his major decisions, choosing which classes he attended, and eventually they began doing his coursework for him. Once Lyle started to have friends and girlfriends towards the end of high school and into college, he couldn't get his dad's approval for any. Even at 21 in 1989, mere months before the murders, he brought his best friend Donovan Goodreau home because he loved him so much that he wanted him to be be a part of his life in the long run, and he knew that was not possible unless he got his dad's express permission. So he literally prepared Donovan to meet his father and trained him, basically brainwashed Donovan the way the dad brainwashed him, so that when the dad asked him any questions, Donovan would know the answers to any of them. But ultimately, this failed, and the interview with his father did not go well.
And we became very close.
Did you want him to be a close part of your life?
Yes, I thought this could be a friend I could have for my life. And
if you were going to have someone who was going to be a friend for your life, would he have to meet someone's approval?
yes,
Whose approval would he have to meet?
he'd have to meet Dad's approval. I tried to, my dad had always said that I couldn't really have close friends. It wouldn't work out for lots of reasons, one of them being that they weren't trained in the same way that I was. They weren't brought up in the same way. And so I knew a lot of the things that my dad respected. And so I basically, I really wanted him to, I wanted him to be a part of my life. And in order for that to happen, he had to be accepted in the world I had with my dad. I helped him memorize all the phrases my dad had me memorize.
Now, when you say all the phrases, are these phrases out of a particular book?
Yes, the ones I repeated the other day and a lot more. That.
What book are we talking about?
The Greatest Salesman in the World.
By?
Ogmandino.
And so did you begin training Donovan?
Yes.
How did you train him?
We just went over and over and over the passages. I give him an understanding of why my dad had me read them, what they meant to him. We had lots of long talks about my dad and what he would admire and what he would not. I helped him, I gave him a good idea of the way my dad spoke and not to be rambling on in his presence, and how to get an indication of when the atmosphere changed in the room and he would want him to be silent, because my dad was very fiercely critical of people, and especially my friends. I had never had a friend that even came close to his approval.
Well, we traveled everywhere together. We just never stopped talking. I mean, in my truck, in his Volkswagen, everywhere, over dinner.
Do you remember an incident where he took Lyle down into the basement for an extended talk at Aunt Terry's?
Yes, I do.
How long was that talk?
3 hours.
Did anybody else go down there during that period of time?
I don't know.
Were you there the whole time?
The whole conversation? I can't remember if I was there the whole conversation.
Why were you particularly nervous about meeting Mr. Menendez under those conditions?
Lyle had told me about a former friend of his named Cole, whose father, I think, liked Cole, but didn't think that he was going to accomplish much, and kind of thought that he wouldn't be a very good influence for Lyle.
Did you practice for this dinner table conversation?
Yes, we did.
How did you practice?
Well, he would play the part of his father.
He being Lyle?
Yeah.
And you would be you?
I would be me.
And how often did you practice before this dinner table conversation?
I can't recall how long we did it, but it seemed like maybe a little more than an hour.
And after you had this hour practice session to meet Mr. Menendez, was the actual meeting similar to the way the practice session had been?
Yes, it was.
In what ways?
The questions weren't exactly the same, but I felt as equally under pressure with Lyle as I was with his father, having to say the same ridiculous answers over and over again, being false.
And the actual dinner conversation with Mr. Menendez was in fact intense?
Yes, it was.
The Greatest Salesman in the World by Ogmandino?
Yes.
Do you recognize this book?
Yes, I do.
How is it you recognize it?
Lyle gave me a copy of that book when I was living with him.
Who had directed him to this book?
His father.
Did Lyle seem to be able to quote passages of this book?
Yes, quite readily.
And did you learn to memorize sections of this book also?
Yes, I did.
By the end of the relationship, could you quote them?
Within a couple weeks, I could have quoted them.